Whenever Michael was asked about his greatest design inspiration, his favorite place to travel, or for that matter, his favorite anything, he gave the same answer: Rome. He loved everything about Rome. In the fall of 2013, he was fortunate to spend several weeks teaching students from University of Miami and Notre Dame while traveling with his young son. When he returned from that trip, he began to work on his memoir, which was to be published by Princeton Architectural Press. In the memoir, Michael wrote, "When I applied for the Prix de Rome that first year, George Nelson, who'd won it in the early 30s, wrote me a very flattering letter of recommendation. And as a result, I ended up being named a finalist for that prize. The jury was packed with some of the most prominent architects in America. Saarinen was on it, along with Pietro Belluschi and Wallace Harrison, the man who'd headed up the team that designed the UN building. I remember walking into the office where the final presentation was to be held in the ultra-chic, ultra-modernist Pepsi-Cola building on Park Avenue and 59th Street, which was brand new at the time. There were 5 of us, the boys in our narrow ties and the girls in patterned dresses, in this gleaming glass box with its enormous windows looking onto the avenue. I looked across the room and saw a lovely girl reading Golf Digest, upside down. That's how nervous we all were. The girl, as it transpired, was Astra Zarina, who went on to become a very successful architect herself. The panelists asked me a number of questions. It was an absolutely nerve-wracking process, since at that point, they'd already ranked all of us based on our material, but we had no way of knowing what our rank was. At the time, I felt I must have been at a disadvantage, since all the jury members, and I suspect most of the other candidates, had been to Europe, were wealthy and sophisticated and worldly, and I was just some kid who'd almost gotten himself kicked out of Harvard. Still, the judges appeared to like the portfolio of my Harvard student proposals I'd given them, and they seemed especially impressed by my drawings. Nevertheless, I wasn't too hopeful. For an American who'd never been outside the United States and whose earliest architectural influence was a stockyard in Indiana, the Prix de Rome seemed practically impossible. Yet somehow, against all the odds, the jury chose my portfolio. I won the prize. I was going to Rome. I'd always had a hunch that being an architect and teaching architecture would satisfy my mother's requirement that I give back in some way. But it wasn't until I went to Europe that I really discovered why I wanted to be an architect, or how an architect like me could make a difference. The 2 years I spent abroad, bumming around the continent looking at buildings and soaking up the culture of the old world, would be the making of me as an architect. Now, please give me a warm welcome to Adele Chatfield-Taylor, President Emerita, American Academy in Rome.
I don't think there were many things in the world that meant more to Michael than Rome, as you've just heard. And he loved to talk about the way it all unfolded for him while he was at the American Academy, starting 55 years ago and forever after that. Michael won the Rome Prize in the winter of 1960 when he was 25. And as you've just heard, that jury also selected the first woman architect ever for the Rome Prize in Architecture, Latvian-born Astra Zarina. So it was an historic day all the way around. The Academy is known for its cross-disciplinary collaborations, and as Michael often attested, it can be the exchange among the fellows who are farthest afield that is the most transformative. Say, the archaeologist and the poet, the composer and the classicist, or the architect and the art historian. He spent his first year just listening, he always said, never opening his mouth, and his second year speaking up, challenging, and interrupting. From then on, he was a marked man, marked by what he had learned from his fellows, by his love for Italy, by his fascination with the fact that Rome was inexhaustible, by his own expansion that would lead him in unexpected directions, and by his discovery that it is actually necessary to live with artists and scholars if you are to develop the skills and knowledge to participate in any real discourse. Hone the habits of work and mine your own native intelligence to solve the problems of your time. He remained close to the group he had lived with in Rome during that time, and it wasn't long before he had resuscitated the alumni organization of the Academy so that they could have a formal way to remain engaged. And soon thereafter, he joined the board of the institution proper. He went to Rome often, as a resident at the Academy, where he naturally assumed the role of a teacher, or on his own, just to be there. I overlapped with him in the 80s when I was a fellow and accompanied him on some of his walks, such as to the Tempietto, which he continued to draw and draw and draw to perfect his representation of the roundness of the back of the building, even though it wasn't in the picture. In Rome, he would be both supercharged and walking on air. He was a generous and committed trustee to the Academy for his entire professional life, and he was the first life trustee to be elected 5 years ago. He served on our juries, enabled us to start a Rome Prize in his name, designed a new trustees medal, shook down our efforts at accessibility at the Academy, and when the time came, designed as a gift to us the Barbara Goldsmith Rare Book Room, a state-of-the-art marvel that is known all over Rome and beyond for its innovation and beauty. Despite his work schedule and his health, he never gave up Rome. He went there to teach, as you've heard, in 2013, and planned to go again for a semester this year. His students worshiped him and followed him around like the Pied Piper. It seemed to give him immense satisfaction. Besides his devoted family of colleagues who've been so loyal and helpful to him all these years, I must acknowledge Min here, whose watchful eye and tender care made such trips to Rome possible. She extended his life and made it happy, productive, and sweet. We're grateful for that, and for Michael's Rome-touched buildings, his inventions, his paintings and drawings, his Rome-bedecked villa, that I call a villa instead of the warehouse, here in Princeton, and all his creations that, together with our memories of him, will continue to inspire us for a long time to come. Thank you.
One of the many things that Michael learned about in Rome, and for which he became known, was the inclusion of public art in modern architecture. To speak about that legacy, I am very pleased to welcome Michael's friend and my dear friend, Tom Moran, Chief Curator and Artistic Director of Grounds for Sculpture.
Good afternoon. Drawing was Michael Graves' poetry, and it was the center of his creative process. As a young man, he discovered his freedom with drawing. He drew cartoons of Donald Duck and on a prophetic journey as if he knew his impending future. His obsession with drawing led him to choose architecture as his profession. Drawing gave him his power to think about and change the world. I could stop here, but Michael would not stop here because there is more and more to tell. After graduating from Harvard with his master's in architecture, he won a Rome Prize Fellowship in 1960 to study at the Academy. His time in Italy was transformative. Perhaps the greatest collection of architecture, monuments, sculptures, and murals were literally at his feet. And Michael was ready to absorb this opportunity, as if suddenly the doors to the studios of Bernini, Michelangelo, and others were flung wide open. Michael began the production of dozens of drawings, and in the process made invaluable observations which ultimately formed the deepest roots of his design philosophy. The freedom he discovered in recording the architectural verse of these heroes would profoundly shape his destiny and lead him to his own revolution. Back in the United States, Michael began to forge a unique reputation with his architecture, one with a bold, more figurative vision based in Western classicism and running contrary to the long-standing dogmas of the time. All the while, he communicated his design intent through his drawings. Michael's main focus was centered on the return of humanistic principles to the experiences of architecture and design, and he saw the incorporation of art as one of the key ways to achieve that. His projects became internationally known for their incorporation of sculpture, decorative patterns, friezes, and murals. Included in this legacy is the mural he painted based upon the cartoon Industrial Landscape, his first public commission completed in 1984 for the Environmental Education Center. Instead of plopping huge sculptures in front of buildings, Michael searched for ways to incorporate public art into the greater context and to achieve deeper meaning. The sculpture of Portlandia for the Portland building, the sculptural frieze on the facade of the Disney headquarters, and the massive sculptures atop the Disney hotels, the Swan, and the Dolphin were each transformative in the field of public art, and they all harken back to his experiences in Rome. The exhibition, Michael Graves passed as prologue on view at Grounds for Sculpture, presents 50 years of Michael's work in an historic overview of an artist of enormous consequence. His design philosophy is fully revealed in his humanistic principles of his art, architecture, and product design. The exhibition features over 250 of his seminal works, architectural projects, products, murals, sculptures, and of course his drawings. It opened to record crowds on October 18, 2014, and was a joy for Michael. It pleased him so much to reconnect with many of his accomplishments and also his friends, students, and colleagues. It is indeed an honor for Grounds for Sculpture to have mounted such a significant retrospective of his work. The exhibition, extended until today, truly reveals why Michael, our hero, was one of the most authentic and significant architects, artists, and designers of the 20th century and today. Thank you.
I now have the privilege to introduce architect, professor, and someone that Michael considered a dear friend, Frank Martinez.
Thank you, Ben. How kind sometimes heaven proves to be when it brings together in a single person the boundless riches of its treasures, all the graces and rare gifts that over a period of time are usually divided amongst many individuals. This can be seen in no less excellent than gracious, writes Vasari about the architect and painter Raphael in the Lives of the Artists. These words that perfectly describe Michael Graves, the architect, teacher, artist, and friend. Excellence and grace. Michael reminded us of why young students of architecture would go to Rome to study the work of the masters, to discover why and how they became masterpieces. Moreover, Michael encouraged students to seek knowledge and never limit the understanding of a theory or a thing by finding a source and a beginning for it. Perhaps his most rare gift is that he was open to the change and evolution involved in the creative process, I will briefly try to convey how teaching in Rome with Michael deepened my regard for his sense of responsibility, for the art of making cities, buildings, and the role of educators in both providing a base of knowledge and advancing the profession. Michael Graves' legacy rests on the extraordinary range of his work, influence on architectural education, the architectural profession, and design. He is part of an American architectural continuum of great architects and architectural firms, architects that uniquely shaped and transformed American urban form and the built landscape. This lineage ranges, as we have seen today, from Charles Bulfinch and Henry Hobson Richardson to McKim, Mead and White, Louis Sullivan, and Frank Lloyd Wright, architects whose buildings characterize their time and resonate by marking significant thresholds in architectural thought. Michael Graves will forever be credited with revitalizing traditional form and space-making principles by way of architectural drawing, humanistic plan making, the notion of narrative, and meaningful language in architecture. In Rome, I had the privilege to visit and discuss the Pantheon, also the burial place of Raphael, with Michael, faculty, and students in the fall of 2013 during our University of Miami and University of Notre Dame Rome program, about which I will share some thoughts and describe just a few experiences. Michael was my teacher here at Princeton while I was in graduate school, and I also had the honor of him being my thesis advisor. We stayed in touch over the years, and I somehow managed to convince Michael to teach a studio in Miami. This was before his paralysis. Subsequent visits to Miami focused on Michael's health, and then happily to his participation in our School of Architecture reviews, lectures, or as he called them, conversations, and eventually more design studios. These Miami studios always included a visit and a session in Princeton where the students presented their research, were introduced to the workings of Michael's office, both architecture and product design, along with always a celebration at the warehouse. These studios were defining moments for students who were fortunate enough to learn and spend time with Michael, as so many of us here today, his former students, really understand. Notre Dame's dean, Michael Licoutis, had the idea of a joint Miami and Notre Dame studio in Chicago with Michael. And somehow the conversation led to Rome. All I can say is Michael nodded, smiled, and said, Rome. The truly amazing thing is how both Miami Dean Elizabeth Plater-Zyberg and Notre Dame Dean Licoutis had the same instant reaction, expressing admiration and support for such a powerful opportunity and collaboration. So the planning began in the fall of 2012 for the fall of 2013. Michael started simply by opening a Piranesi book and asking, how about a project that works with the Portico di Octavia, a first-century building built by Augustus and an emblematic but unique ancient monument in Rome that has all the rich layering of Rome's history and has served as muse and inspiration to architects and artists since the 1st century. So this became the project site. It was an inspired choice from a pedagogical point of view and a terrific challenge for the student design teams. The most amazing day was our first site visit with Michael. The students watched Michael negotiate all the slopes on his iBot chair as he enthusiastically orchestrated the faculty in a discussion on architecture and the exceptional buildings and fabric that composed the context of the site. Although the students had, 2 weeks prior, begun to document and research the project site, it was actually then, that instant with Michael, that they really that they really understood the reality of the design challenge, and it took hold of their imaginations. Michael stayed at the Hotel Minerva, around the corner from the Pantheon, and 44 students, 7 faculty worked at the Notre Dame facilities, just a short walk away on the Via Monterone, where the ground floor of the library space was opened up to serve as studio crit and review space. The Piazza Sant'Estachio, Il Café Sant'Estachio, and Gelato, yes, Gelato, di cioccolato, chocolate, Michael's favorite. He had one every evening. The 3-week project proper itinerary with Michael was organized to take advantage of the city as an open book. Michael wanted studio sessions to be bracketed by passeggiata, or walks in the city, where the Faculty of Architecture, History, and Drawing would discuss the topics of interest to the studio project in a shared process. We would all learn from each other. We made some excursions to the outskirts of the city, such as to Santa Costanza, a circular building originally built as a mausoleum for the daughter of the Emperor Constantine, and an inspiration to generations of architects visiting Rome, not the least of which was Eric Gunnar Asplund, and one of Michael's favorites. However, the majority of the walks were in the center of Rome and thematically organized. Upon Michael's arrival in Rome, and really just the long weekend before we began the first studio session, we practically visited all of the buildings and places on the schedule. It was such a joy, as Michael wanted to collect all his thoughts on the work and the talks for our classes. You know, talk about an extraordinary and remarkable work ethic. He tested me at all the buildings, emphasizing always the best lessons. A perfect example was at the Cortile of Santa Maria della Pace by Bramante, where Michael wanted me to include, in explaining to the students, every detail of how Bramante handled geometry, base systems, centers, denying centers, the use of the orders, and so on. It made me realize how committed he was to the delivery of ideas. I'll never forget that he said to me, just before we started, "We're going to do a great job, so they ask us to do it again." So, and in fact they did, as we had just received the go-ahead to run version 2 this coming September. This was the last conversation I had with Michael, a phone conversation, and I remember holding for a second and hearing him say, "Minnie, we're going to Rome." I will end on a very special visit with Michael, or a very special visit that Michael planned for the group, to spend the day at the American Academy in Rome. We visited Michael's studio, where he told us stories of how he had used the space and how lucky he was to have enjoyed the opportunities afforded to him. This was followed, well, the group had a great lunch set on long tables in the arcaded gallery surrounding the Cortile. I believe you saw a picture. This was followed by Michael's grand tour lecture in the auditorium. He was beautifully introduced by Adele Chatfield-Taylor. And then Michael, with his fantastic storytelling capabilities, took the students and all those at the Academy on a visual tour by way of 2 homes, the warehouse in Princeton and the American Academy in Rome, all the while sharing the source and the beginnings of his life's work. Michael's smile was an act of grace. To hear him use the words "sweet" about design meant that you were doing something right. To hear him use the word terrific, terrific transfers one across time and reintroduces the idea that excellence is a goal. It's hard to mourn the loss of a friend. I'm blessed to have Michael call me his friend, and it's something that I will always cherish. I found myself reflecting on how profound the passing of great architects, such as Brunelleschi, Leonardo, Palladio, Bramante, Raphael, and Michelangelo, all architects who traveled to Rome to study the master works, must have been in their time, and for those who cared and learned from them. These artists were the best of their generation. I take great comfort and pride in knowing that Michael, like them, always did his best, and in a way that only few have done and can never hope to accomplish. Like the best of our ancestors, his best is magical, and his best is our best. Go to thy rest, sweet sir.